June 1942. Sevastopol was no longer a city. It was a wound. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and the smell of burned concrete. Buildings had collapsed into jagged piles of stone, turning every street into a killing ground. Somewhere inside this ruin, two snipers were already hunting each other, though only one of them understood it. The German sniper had arrived days earlier. He was not ordinary infantry. He was trained in Berlin, shaped by doctrine, discipline, and patience. His logbook listed more than 400 confirmed kills. To him, the battlefield was not chaos, but geometry, distances, angles, lines of sight. He chose his position carefully, settling into the rubble where shadow and stone concealed his body. From there, he watched a single Soviet-held building across the shattered street, measuring every broken window. For 12 hours, he did not move. He did not drink. He did not shift his rifle. This was how he had survived every duel before. The first man to move was always the one who died. The Germans believed their snipers were unmatched, and until now, the evidence supported that belief. Across the ruins, the Soviet position appeared silent. No muzzle flashes, no careless movement, only darkness inside the blown-out windows. To the German sniper, this meant one thing. His enemy was inexperienced or afraid. Someone would eventually make a mistake. They always did. What he could not see was that he was already being studied. Hidden among the broken stones, far from the building he was watching, lay Lyudmila Pavlichenko. She was 25 years old, a history student, a factory worker turned soldier. She did not think like the men trained in European sniper schools. She did not wait for perfection. She waited for predictability. She understood something the German sniper did not. Hunters do not kill by force. They kill by controlling attention. As the sun climbed higher and the heat settled into the ruins, Pavlichenko prepared her trap. Not a shot, not a movement. Just a small piece of cloth tied to a stick, slowly raised where a careless enemy would expect to see a head. The duel had already been decided. The German sniper simply did not know it yet. To understand why the trap worked, you have to understand who Lyudmila Pavlichenko was before the war stripped her life down to survival. She was not raised to be a soldier. She was not trained by the Red Army's sniper schools at first. She was a history student in Kyiv, working in a weapons factory when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. Like millions of others, she watched her future collapse in a single announcement. And like many, she volunteered immediately. The recruiter saw a young woman and assumed weakness. He suggested nursing. She refused. He laughed. She did not. When finally handed a rifle, she was told to prove herself. Two Romanian soldiers stood far away, nearly 400 meters out, barely visible. 2 shots followed. 2 bodies fell. There were no cheers, no celebration, just silence. Pavlichenko called them test shots and never counted them. But the war she entered was not the war the Germans expected. The Red Army was bleeding. Units were shattered, equipment was outdated, training was rushed. But desperation had one advantage. It broke traditions that other armies clung to. The Soviet command made a decision the Germans never fully respected. They deployed women as frontline snipers, not as symbols, but as weapons. Pavlichenko was sent to Odessa, then to Sevastopol, cities where fighting was not about open fields or long sight lines, but rubble, shadows, and sound. Sniper combat here was intimate, brutal, fast. German snipers followed doctrine, patience above all, one perfect shot, absolute stillness. They believed speed was reckless, semi-automatic rifles were inferior, accuracy mattered more than anything. Pavlichenko disagreed. She chose the SVT-40, a semi-automatic rifle scorned by traditional snipers. It was less precise at extreme range, but it gave her something more important in urban combat: speed. The first shot revealed your position. The second shot decided who lived. While a German sniper worked the bolt, Pavlichenko was already firing again. But the rifle was only a tool. The real weapon was her mind. Before the war, Pavlichenko hunted small game. Rabbits. Fast animals with sharp instincts. You did not chase them. You misled them. You made them expose themselves by reacting to something that wasn't real. She applied the same logic to men. German snipers were trained to look for three things: movement, muzzle flash, and scope glint. Pavlichenko built her entire method around denying all three. She created false movement. She removed real movement. She forced the enemy to act. Decoys became her signature. A helmet placed just high enough. A strip of cloth tied where wind would catch it. A sleeve lifted slowly into view. Each decoy was bait, designed not to fool a novice, but to provoke a professional. A trained sniper could not ignore movement. Ignoring it was how you died. And every time a German sniper fired at the bait, he revealed himself. Sometimes the trick went further. When grazed by a shot while climbing for a better position, Pavlichenko did not fire back. She let herself fall from the tree, hitting the ground hard enough to sell the illusion. She lay motionless for hours. The German sniper, convinced he had scored a kill, moved on. At nightfall, she crawled away. This was not bravery, it was discipline. In less than 3 months at Odessa, her confirmed kills climbed into the hundreds. German units began to fear certain sectors of the line. They spoke of a ghost, a presence that could not be located, a sniper who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. When Odessa fell, Pavlichenko was sent to Sevastopol. There, the hunt became personal. Her husband, a fellow sniper, was killed by a mortar shell. From that moment on, restraint vanished. The war was no longer abstract. It was a ledger that had to be balanced. German command noticed. Regular infantry stopped being sent against her sector. Instead, they deployed their best. Counter-snipers trained specifically to kill other snipers, men with dozens, then hundreds of confirmed kills. They believed this would end the problem. What they did not understand was that Pavlichenko did not fight duels the way they did. She did not wait to see her enemy. She waited for her enemy to choose to be seen. And somewhere in the ruins of Sevastopol, one of Germany's most decorated snipers settled into position, convinced he was about to kill another Soviet amateur. He had no idea that the ghost he was hunting had already mapped his habits, predicted his patience, and prepared something so simple that it felt insulting. A piece of cloth, a raised stick, and a hunter who knew exactly when another hunter could no longer resist pulling the trigger. By the summer of 1942, Sevastopol had become a graveyard of certainty. Every rule the German sniper corps believed in was being quietly dismantled, one body at a time. At first, the reports were dismissed. Snipers lost in combat was nothing new. But these losses followed a pattern that disturbed German command. Their men were not being outshot, they were being outplayed. Experienced marksmen vanished without ever seeing the face of their enemy. Carefully chosen positions were compromised without warning. Duels ended before they truly began. Then a name began to circulate: Lady Death. The Germans did not believe it at first. Propaganda officers dismissed it as Soviet myth-making. The idea that a single sniper, worse, a woman, could be responsible for such damage was insulting to everything they believed about hierarchy, training, and superiority. Berlin-trained snipers were supposed to be the apex of the battlefield predator chain, so command escalated. They stopped sending competent men. They started sending elite ones. These snipers arrived with special instructions: hunt the ghost, kill her, restore order. Each man carried confidence, earned through dozens, sometimes hundreds of confirmed kills. They believed they were entering a duel of equals. They were wrong. Pavlichenko understood something fundamental about sniper psychology. The more experienced a sniper becomes, the more he trusts his instincts. And the more he trusts his instincts, the easier those instincts are to manipulate. She studied patterns: how long a sniper waited before shifting, how often he scanned left before right, how patience degraded into restlessness. She did not rush engagements. Sometimes she watched for an entire day without firing a single shot. The goal was not to kill quickly. The goal was to kill inevitably. German loudspeakers began broadcasting messages across the ruins. They tried flattery first. Promises of rank, chocolate, safety, a life spared. When that failed, the tone changed. Threats replaced bribes. They promised to tear her into pieces, to hunt her endlessly, to make an example of her. Pavlichenko listened, unmoved. In her memoirs, she would later write that the threats pleased her. They meant the enemy knew her score, and the score kept climbing. The most famous duel came when German command finally sent one of their legends, an officer, a man whose logbook credited him with more than 400 confirmed kills. He was everything the German sniper program aspired to create. For 3 days, the duel stretched on. No decoys, no tricks, no shots. They lay hidden in the same ruined sector, separated by rubble and silence. The heat pressed down. Flies crawled across exposed skin. Thirst clawed at discipline. Neither moved, neither fired. This was sniper combat reduced to its purest form, endurance. On the third day, the German sniper made the mistake Pavlichenko had been waiting for. Not a dramatic one, not panic, just the smallest shift, a moment of certainty turning into impatience. One movement too many, one breath too exposed, one shot. When Pavlichenko later retrieved his body, she found the logbook. The numbers were real. The reputation was earned, and it ended there, in the rubble of Sevastopol, killed not by superior firepower, but by superior understanding. By June 1942, Pavlichenko's confirmed kills stood at 309. 36 of them were enemy snipers. 36 duels, 36 victories. She had been wounded multiple times and returned each time to the front. But Sevastopol was collapsing. The city was being erased piece by piece. Ammunition ran low. Positions vanished under artillery fire. Pavlichenko fought without pause, driven less by orders now than by momentum and memory. Then the war caught her, the way it catches everyone eventually. Not by skill, not by tactics, not by a sniper's bullet. A random mortar shell exploded nearby, sending shrapnel into her face. The damage was catastrophic. She collapsed into the rubble, bleeding and unconscious. When Soviet soldiers reached her, they knew immediately this was different. Lady Death had finally been silenced. The frontline war was over for Lyudmila Pavlichenko, but the weapon she had become was too valuable to lose. And Moscow had already decided her next battlefield would not be made of stone and dust, but microphones, speeches, and the minds of men who still believed they could afford to wait. Lyudmila Pavlichenko did not leave Sevastopol as a conqueror. She left as cargo. A Soviet submarine slipped out of the shattered harbor, under cover of darkness, one of the last to escape before the city fell. Inside, Pavlichenko lay bandaged and barely conscious, her face shattered by shrapnel, her body exhausted beyond recovery. The battlefield that had defined her no longer existed. And for the first time since the war began, she was powerless. To the Soviet High Command, this was unacceptable. They did not see a wounded woman. They saw a weapon that had already proven its value. A sniper who had killed 309 enemy soldiers. A symbol strong enough to survive even the collapse of an entire front. Letting her return to combat would be wasteful. Letting her die would be unforgivable. So they reassigned her. Her new mission was not to kill, but to persuade. In late 1942, Pavlichenko was sent west. Not with a rifle, but with medals pinned to her chest and scars she could not hide. She traveled to the United States, Canada, and Great Britain as part of a Soviet diplomatic tour. Her objective was simple and brutally direct: force the Allies to open a second front in Europe. She was 25 years old. She had spent the last year living in rubble, hunting men who hunted her. Now she stood on stages, under lights, surrounded by politicians, journalists, and crowds who had never heard artillery up close. The Americans did not know what to do with her. The press did not see Lady Death. They saw a young woman in uniform and treated her like a curiosity. Reporters asked about her clothes, her makeup, whether she stayed feminine at the front. One criticized the length of her skirt. Pavlichenko listened. Her expression did not change. But something inside her hardened. She had endured 3-day sniper duels. She had watched her husband die in her arms. She had buried more friends than she could count. And now she was being asked about lipstick. She answered them anyway. Calmly. Precisely. Like a sniper choosing when to fire. Then came Chicago. Standing before a massive crowd, Pavlichenko abandoned diplomacy. She abandoned patience. She spoke the way she had fought. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders." The crowd went silent. "Don't you think," she continued, "that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" It was not a threat. It was not propaganda. It was an accusation. The effect was immediate. The speech spread. Newspapers printed it. Politicians reacted. Public pressure intensified. Pavlichenko had done what years of negotiations struggled to accomplish. She turned her personal war into a moral lever. Artists noticed. The folk singer Woody Guthrie wrote a song about her, Miss Pavlichenko. She became something far more dangerous than a sniper. She became an idea, a reminder that while the West debated timelines, young men and women were already dying by the thousands, that the war could not be postponed indefinitely. That patience, the same patience that had killed so many German snipers, could no longer be afforded by those standing safely behind oceans. Yet even as she traveled and spoke, the war never left her. At night, she did not sleep easily. The rubble followed her, the silence before a shot, the sound of breath slowing. She carried Sevastopol with her into every room. When the tour ended, Pavlichenko did not seek more attention. She did not chase fame. She returned home, quietly. She finished her studies, became a historian, worked for the Soviet Navy. On paper, she survived the war. But survival is not the same as peace. She struggled with depression, with alcohol, with the ghosts of men she had hunted and men she had loved. The rabbit hunter who had outthought Germany's best had no trick that could erase memory. The battlefield had changed again. And this time, there were no decoys to raise, no angles to calculate, no moment where patience guaranteed victory. Only the slow work of living with what she had done and what the war had turned her into. When the war finally ended, the world moved forward without asking permission from those it had broken. Cities were rebuilt. Borders were redrawn. Victory speeches were delivered. Medals were stored in drawers. And Lyudmila Pavlichenko faded from headlines, just as she had faded into rubble years earlier. She did not become a celebrity. She did not write heroic memoirs to glorify her kills. She returned to what she had been before history intervened. A student, a researcher, a historian. She worked quietly for the Soviet Navy, cataloging conflicts, studying wars she understood more intimately than any archive ever could. But history does not release its witnesses so easily. The numbers followed her. 309 men, 36 snipers, entire units altered because they feared a single unseen presence. Yet none of those figures explained the cost. The sleepless nights, the weight of memory, the face of her husband dying in her arms, the knowledge that survival had required her to think like a hunter when the prey was human. For years, she lived with the consequences in silence. And then, unexpectedly, the past returned in the form of a friendship. During her 1942 tour of the United States, Pavlichenko had formed a bond with Eleanor Roosevelt. The two women could not have been more different. One was a Soviet sniper forged in rubble and blood. The other, the First Lady of the United States, raised in privilege and diplomacy, yet they shared something rare. They listened to each other without illusion. They wrote letters, carefully, quietly, across years and rising Cold War tension. In 1957, Eleanor Roosevelt visited Moscow. Soviet officials controlled every step of her itinerary, every word she spoke. But Roosevelt insisted on one meeting. She would not leave without seeing her friend. They took her to Pavlichenko's small apartment. 2 rooms, sparse, modest, a far cry from the stages and crowds that once surrounded her. A government minder stood nearby, listening. The 2 women spoke politely at first, carefully, like strangers. Then Pavlichenko made an excuse. She asked Roosevelt to see something in the bedroom. She closed the door, and away from microphones, from ideology, from the war that had defined them both, the 2 women embraced. They laughed, they cried, they spoke in whispers, catching up on 15 years of life that history had stolen. It was a moment no archive recorded, no camera captured, and yet it may have been the most human moment of Pavlichenko's entire war. She died in 1974, at the age of 58. Today, Lyudmila Pavlichenko is remembered as the most successful female sniper in history. Lady Death. A legend measured in numbers and confirmed kills. But that was never the full story. Her story is about a 14-year-old girl who refused to be told she could not shoot. A student who refused to be a nurse when the world demanded obedience. A hunter who understood that the battlefield rewards not strength, but perception. The German sniper she killed at the beginning of this story believed war was about patience and precision. He was right. He just never imagined that patience could look like a piece of cloth on a stick, or that the deadliest hunter in the ruins of Sevastopol would be a woman who learned how to hunt rabbits long before she ever learned how to hunt men. War is often explained through numbers. Divisions moved, cities taken, casualties counted, victories declared. But numbers lie by omission. They tell us what happened, not how it was possible, and never what it did to the people inside it. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's story is usually reduced to a single statistic: 309 confirmed kills. The deadliest female sniper in history. A record no one has surpassed. But if that is all we see, then we miss the lesson entirely, because her story is not about killing. It is about how understanding beats strength, how perception defeats power, and how survival often belongs to the one who refuses to think the way everyone else does. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union, it did so with confidence grounded in doctrine. The Wehrmacht believed in structure, hierarchy, and standardized superiority. Their sniper corps was elite, trained in Berlin and Munich, governed by strict rules, patience, discipline, perfection. The Red Army, by contrast, was collapsing. Officers purged, units shattered, equipment outdated, training rushed. From a purely technical standpoint, the Soviets should not have survived the first year. But desperation has a strange advantage. Desperation breaks rules. The Soviet decision to deploy women as frontline snipers was not ideological progress. It was necessity. And necessity does not ask permission from tradition. It simply asks one question: will this work? Lyudmila Pavlichenko was never meant to exist in German calculations. She violated their expectations at every level. She was young, she was female, she was not trained in their schools. She did not follow their doctrine, and that was precisely why she survived. The first lesson is simple and brutal. Systems fail when they cannot imagine deviation. Any enemy, organization, or institution that assumes superiority through uniformity will eventually be outmaneuvered by someone who does not play by its rules. German sniper doctrine worshipped the perfect shot. One bullet, one kill. Absolute certainty. The bolt-action rifle symbolized this philosophy. Precision above all else. Pavlichenko chose a semi-automatic rifle, the SVT 40-something. Traditional snipers considered inferior, less accurate at extreme range, more prone to mechanical issues. But she was not fighting in forests or open fields. She was fighting in urban ruins, where visibility was short, angles unpredictable, and survival often depended on the second shot, not the first. She understood something critical. The first shot reveals you. In modern conflict, as in life, the moment you act, you expose yourself. What matters is not flawless execution, but what you can do immediately after. Pavlichenko traded theoretical perfection for practical dominance. She accepted slightly less accuracy in exchange for overwhelming speed. That choice killed men who were technically superior but tactically rigid. The lesson here extends far beyond warfare. In business, creativity, conflict, and survival itself, perfection often delays action. Speed paired with adaptability creates momentum, and momentum kills hesitation every time. Pavlichenko's most lethal weapon was not her rifle. It was deception. German snipers were trained to react to movement. They had to. Ignoring movement was how you died. Their training conditioned them to respond automatically when certain visual triggers appeared. Pavlichenko exploited that conditioning. She raised decoys, pieces of cloth, helmets on sticks, false movement in the corner of vision. She did not hide herself better, she redirected attention elsewhere. This is a profound lesson. Humans do not react to reality. They react to what they notice. Control what the enemy notices, and you control their behavior. In modern terms, this is psychological warfare, marketing, negotiation, and strategy all at once. You do not defeat an opponent by overpowering them head-on. You defeat them by shaping what they think is important. The German sniper who died in the opening scene did not lose because he was careless. He lost because his attention was hijacked. He shot exactly where he was trained to shoot, and that is why he died. Ironically, the more elite the German snipers sent against Pavlichenko, the easier they became to predict. Experience builds confidence. Confidence hardens into habit. Habit becomes vulnerability. Veteran snipers trusted their instincts. They believed they could recognize real movement from deception. They believed they had seen every trick. That belief killed them. Pavlichenko did not rely on complex traps. She relied on simplicity, repeated patiently. She waited. She observed patterns. She let confidence decay into impatience. The 3-day duel with the German officer credited with over 400 kills illustrates this perfectly. No tricks, no decoys, just endurance. The man who moved first died. The lesson is uncomfortable. Experience does not guarantee wisdom. Sometimes it guarantees blindness. Those who believe they know how things work are often the least prepared for change. At first, Pavlichenko fought as a soldier. Duty, survival, numbers. Then her husband was killed. From that moment on, the war changed shape. Revenge entered the equation. This shift matters because it reveals something deeply human. No one enters violence untouched. No matter how disciplined, how rational, how professional, emotion eventually seeps in. And when it does, it sharpens focus, but corrodes the soul. Pavlichenko became even more lethal after his death, but the cost increased as well. The war stopped being abstract. Every kill carried weight. Every victory added memory. The lesson here is not glorification. It is warning. Hatred can increase effectiveness in the short term, but it leaves damage that cannot be undone. Pavlichenko survived 4 wounds. She survived sniper duels. She survived Sevastopol. She did not survive unscarred. When she was removed from the front, it was not because she failed, but because she had become too valuable to risk. She was preserved as a symbol, and symbols are not allowed to break publicly. Her American tour exposed another battlefield, perception and politics. She was no longer fighting Germans. She was fighting complacency, sexism, and distance. Her speech in Chicago was not propaganda. It was accusation. I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders. That sentence was not meant to impress. It was meant to shame. The lesson is sharp. Truth spoken plainly is more powerful than rhetoric. She forced people to confront the cost of delay. And it worked. After the war, Pavlichenko did what survivors often do. She returned to normal life and discovered it no longer fit. She studied history. She worked quietly. She tried to become ordinary again. But memory does not obey orders. PTSD, depression, alcoholism. These were not weaknesses. They were consequences. The price of living too long inside a mindset designed for killing. Societies celebrate warriors when they are useful. They forget them when the war ends. This is perhaps the most important lesson of all. War creates skills that do not translate to peace. The patience that kept her alive in rubble did not help her sleep. The alertness that detected movement became anxiety. The emotional suppression that enabled survival became isolation. Victory does not erase damage. It only postpones acknowledgement. The reunion with Eleanor Roosevelt was not history-changing. It did not alter borders or strategies. And yet, it may have been the most meaningful moment of Pavlichenko's life. 2 women, 2 worlds, no cameras, no speeches, just recognition. It reminds us that beneath every uniform, every legend, every statistic, there is a human being still capable of connection, and that may be the ultimate lesson of her story. Not that a woman killed 309 men, but that a society forced a young history student to become a hunter, and then struggled to remember what to do with her once the hunting was over. Lyudmila Pavlichenko survived because she learned how to disappear. In Sevastopol, survival meant erasing the self. No name, no face, no movement that could be read as human. She became posture, shadow, breath control, patience measured in hours. The body existed only as a platform for perception. This is the kind of skill war rewards. But it is also the kind of skill peace punishes. After the war, Pavlichenko was expected to return to a civilian rhythm. Classrooms, offices, conversations about ordinary things. But the habits that saved her life now isolated her from others. She listened more than she spoke. She observed instead of engaging. She measured rooms the way she once measured ruins. War had trained her to see threat everywhere. This is a lesson rarely acknowledged in heroic narratives. Skills optimized for survival in extreme environments often become maladaptive once the environment changes. The very discipline that kept her alive made normal life feel loud, careless, unreal. The mind does not reset simply because the war ends. Survivors do not struggle because they are weak. They struggle because they are too well adapted to a world that no longer exists. Sniping creates an illusion that most soldiers never experience: control. The sniper chooses when to fire, when to move, when to wait. Unlike infantry, who are pushed forward by orders in chaos, the sniper appears autonomous, detached, almost godlike. Pavlichenko understood this illusion intimately. But the mortar shell that ended her frontline war exposed the truth. It was random, not a duel, not a mistake, not a failure of skill, just chance. This is one of war's cruelest lessons. No matter how disciplined, how intelligent, how prepared you are, randomness eventually intervenes. We like to believe that competence guarantees survival, that preparation creates immunity. War destroys that belief systematically. The shell did not care about her score, her reputation, her experience. It did not acknowledge Lady Death, and neither does history, most of the time. The lesson here is sobering. Control is temporary. Planning reduces risk, but it never eliminates it. Those who believe they are untouchable are often the ones least prepared for chance. After her evacuation, Pavlichenko was no longer a tactical asset. She was a strategic one. The Soviet state understood something fundamental. Symbols travel where soldiers cannot. A sniper kills dozens. A story kills thousands of doubts. Her tour of the West was not about persuasion through charm. It was confrontation through reality. Her presence disrupted comfortable distance. She forced people to see the war not as abstraction, but as lived experience carried on a human body. And that made her dangerous. Not because she exaggerated, but because she refused to soften the truth. Her Chicago speech worked because it violated expectations. She did not plead. She did not flatter. She did not negotiate. She accused. The lesson here applies far beyond war. Authentic testimony is more disruptive than polished messaging. People can ignore statistics, they can debate ideology, but they struggle to dismiss a living witness who refuses to perform the role expected of them. Much has been written about Pavlichenko as a female sniper, but often in shallow terms: novelty, exception, symbolism. The reality is more uncomfortable. Her gender was not just a barrier, it was also an advantage. German snipers did not imagine a woman as their equal. That bias shaped how they searched, how they anticipated, how they evaluated threat. Pavlichenko did not defeat sexism by confronting it directly. She defeated it by letting it blind her enemies. This leads to a hard lesson. Assumptions are vulnerabilities. Every rigid belief about who is capable of what creates blind spots. Pavlichenko existed inside those blind spots, and she exploited them mercilessly. In any competitive environment, war, politics, business, the most dangerous opponent is often the one you did not plan for because you did not believe they belonged. Exceptional performance always has a price. Pavlichenko became exceptional by narrowing her world. Everything irrelevant to survival was stripped away. Relationships, comfort, future plans, even identity. She became very good at one thing. But specialization creates fragility. When that one thing is removed, when the rifle is taken away, when the battlefield disappears, the question becomes unavoidable. Who are you now? This is the crisis many veterans face. The world celebrates their peak performance but offers little guidance for descent. Society is good at creating weapons. It is less skilled at reintegrating them. The lesson is not to avoid excellence. It is to understand that extreme excellence in one domain often requires sacrifice in others, and those sacrifices do not automatically reverse. Pavlichenko lived decades after the war ended, but the war lived with her. Memory is not passive. It intrudes. It replays. It edits nothing. It arrives without warning. Sounds, smells, silence. This is where many war stories stop being about history and start being about psychology. The mind that once saved her life by remembering every detail now punished her by remembering too much. This reveals a cruel paradox. The same cognitive intensity that enables survival also deepens trauma. Forgetfulness is often treated as weakness. In reality, selective forgetting is a survival skill in peace. Pavlichenko did not have that luxury. Victory is often portrayed as closure. For Pavlichenko, it was not. Victory meant returning to a society that wanted to remember her selectively, as a hero, as a statistic, as Lady Death, but not as a person who needed help. The Soviet Union honored her publicly but offered little privately. Like many states, it excelled at celebrating sacrifice and struggled to address its consequences. This is a lesson repeated across history. Nations are efficient at mobilizing human beings for war and inefficient at caring for them afterward. Victory solves strategic problems. It does not solve human ones. The rabbit trick that defines this story is often misunderstood. It was not about cleverness. It was about empathy. To deceive a hunter, you must think like one. You must understand what draws their attention, what they cannot ignore, what instincts override caution. Pavlichenko did not outgun her enemies. She inhabited their mindset and led it to destruction. This is the deepest lesson of all. True dominance comes from understanding, not superiority. The German sniper in the opening scene did not fail because he lacked skill. He failed because he assumed his enemy thought the same way he did. He never imagined someone would weaponize his own instincts against him. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's story is not about killing men. It is about how rigid systems collapse under adaptive pressure, how attention can be manipulated more effectively than force, how identity fractures when survival becomes a profession, how societies remember heroes but forget humans, and how war permanently alters the people it requires to win. She began as a student of history. She ended as part of it. And history, unlike war, does not offer second chances. At the beginning of this story, a German sniper believed he was hunting a ghost. In reality, He was hunting a mirror, someone who understood him better than he understood himself. And that is why he died. Not because he was weak, not because he was careless, but because he never imagined the enemy could be watching him the same way he watched others. That is the final lesson. In war, in conflict, in life, the most dangerous opponent is not the one who is stronger, faster, or louder. It is the one who understands how you think before you realize you are being studied. Modern war no longer looks like Sevastopol. There are fewer ruins, fewer trenches, fewer rifles fired from piles of rubble. But the logic of the battlefield has not disappeared. It has migrated from streets into screens, from rifles into narratives, from territory into attention. What Lyudmila Pavlichenko mastered intuitively in 1942 is now practiced systematically in the 21st century. Control, perception, and behavior follows. Her rabbit trick was not about deception for its own sake. It was about forcing the enemy to react predictably. Today, entire industries are built on the same principle. Algorithms raise digital pieces of cloth. Outrage bait, false urgency, manufactured movement in the corner of your awareness. And just like the German sniper, modern societies fire reflexively before asking who placed the bait. The battlefield has not vanished. It has simply become invisible. In Pavlichenko's time, psychological warfare was considered a specialized tool. Loudspeakers, leaflets, rumors spread across front lines. Today, it is ambient. You do not need loudspeakers when people carry them in their pockets. You do not need decoys when attention can be steered by metrics, notifications, and outrage cycles. The same principle applies. Fatigue the observer. German snipers grew tired scanning rubble, reacting to false movement until real danger blended into noise. Modern humans experience the same exhaustion, scrolling endlessly, reacting constantly, until judgment degrades. This is not accidental. Just as Pavlichenko understood that a tired hunter makes mistakes, modern psychological operations, whether political, commercial, or ideological, aim to overwhelm attention until discernment collapses. The lesson is uncomfortable but clear. A distracted society is a vulnerable society. One of the most important parallels between Pavlichenko's story and the modern world lies in how experts fail. The German sniper corps was not incompetent. It was elite. That is precisely why it struggled. Experts rely on patterns. Patterns create efficiency. Efficiency creates rigidity. Modern institutions suffer from the same weakness. Financial analysts miss crashes because they rely on models trained on past behavior. Intelligence agencies miss threats because they search for familiar signatures. Corporations collapse because leadership assumes tomorrow will resemble yesterday. Pavlichenko survived because she was not invested in tradition. She did not protect doctrine. She protected herself. The lesson endures. Expertise must be paired with humility, or it becomes fragility. In 1942, speed meant firing a second shot before the enemy chambered his next round. Today, speed means narrative dominance. Who defines the story first? Who frames the event before facts stabilize? Who moves while others debate accuracy? Perfection is still admired, but it is often too slow. Those who hesitate to act until information is complete often lose influence to those willing to move with incomplete certainty. This does not mean truth is irrelevant. It means timing shapes belief. Pavlichenko understood this instinctively. The second shot mattered more than the perfect one. The modern equivalent is uncomfortable. Waiting for certainty can be a strategic disadvantage. The modern sniper is not hidden in rubble. They are hidden in systems. They aim not at bodies, but at decision points, at trust, at cohesion. Their weapons are selective information, emotional triggers, repetition, fatigue. They do not need to convince everyone. They only need to influence enough people at the right moment. This mirrors Pavlichenko's method perfectly. She did not dominate entire fronts alone. She disrupted key sectors, created fear, forced reallocations, changed behavior disproportionate to her physical presence. Modern influence operations work the same way. Small inputs, large effects. The lesson is unsettling. Scale is no longer required to cause damage. Pavlichenko's gender mattered not symbolically, but strategically. She exploited assumptions without confronting them directly. The Germans did not take her seriously until it was too late. Modern conflicts still revolve around perception of legitimacy. Who is credible? Who is serious? Who is dismissed? Those dismissed often move with fewer constraints. This is why outsiders, minorities, and unconventional actors can reshape systems. Not because they are inherently superior, but because they are underestimated. The Pavlichenko lesson applies cleanly. Never confuse marginalization with incapacity. Modern societies are better at naming trauma, but not necessarily better at treating it. Pavlichenko's post-war struggle mirrors what millions experience today, not just veterans. Burnout, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, difficulty reintegrating after prolonged stress. The modern world does not require war to produce these symptoms. Prolonged crisis, instability, and psychological pressure can create similar effects. The lesson remains: humans are not designed for constant threat. When societies normalize stress, they quietly erode resilience.